So the first super chat question I got was, how did major socialist states react to the Symbionese Liberation Army and the Red Army faction? Now, for those of you who do not know, the Symbionese Liberation Army was an ultra-left adventurist terrorist group in the United States. And we'll just go over their history real quick. Why not, right? I think a lot of people don't know this stuff. So there was a communist group in the United States called the Revolutionary Union, RU. And they were a group of Maoists in the Bay Area. They were pretty big, and they were, Bob Avakian and the RCP eventually came out of that, but it was a much bigger group, the Revolutionary Union. Originally, it was the Bay Area Revolutionary Union, BARU. Eventually, they tried to go national and became the Revolutionary Union. But they had disagreements over Cuba, and they had disagreements about what kind of activism to engage in. There was a guy named Bruce Franklin, who is now a professor at Rutgers University. And he writes books on the history of the Vietnam War and literature and stuff. But Bruce Franklin, he led a split from the Revolutionary Union that was pro-Cuba and advocated urban guerrilla warfare and street fighting. So Bruce Franklin and his group, they left the Revolutionary Union and they formed something called Venceremos. And it was a communist activist group that supported Cuba. The RCP, the Revolutionary Union, said that Cuba was revisionist, wasn't really socialist. They supported Cuba, and they were interested in urban guerrilla warfare and street fighting and some of this ultra-left adventurous stuff. I don't think they ever did anything, but they talked about it. They promoted some of the writings of Regis Debray and Frantz Fanon, and they were more into the militant street fighting kind of stuff. So, they were ultra-left, right? So Venceremos started a prison visitation program. It's actually kind of interesting. So in the United States, in a lot of prisons, a lot of county jails and stuff like that, they have open visitation, meaning you don't have to know anybody who's in the jail. You don't even have to be there to see a specific prisoner. They have certain hours where if you want to go visit prisoners, you can just show up, right? So anybody off the street can just walk in and say, hey, and just talk to a prisoner, right? They have open visitation. So Venceremos, which was this split from the Revolutionary Union, they started doing prison visits in the hope that they would recruit the prisoners to be communists. So they're doing these prison visits in San Francisco. They're doing these, county jail prison visits, and a couple of their members started visiting. They met a prisoner named Don DeFries. And Don DeFries recruited them, I guess. They quit the Venceremos group, and these two people that had been in the Venceremos group, I think they started working with this guy, Don DeFries, and they formed a group of 9 people, a tiny little group they called the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. And even the word Symbionese, that is not a word in the English language. There is no country called Symboia that they were from. It was because in biology, I guess, there's a process they call symbiosis. Symbiosis, where mitosis is when 2 cells divide, but I guess when cells come together, some biologist will have to correct me. My understanding is when some cells come together, that's called symbiosis. So Don DeFries and these 2 guys that were in the Venceremos group, they started the Symbionese Liberation Army. And their symbol was a rattlesnake heads. And they were this group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and it was 9 people, some of whom were in Venceremos and some of whom were prisoners who'd worked with Don DeFries. They were the Symbionese Liberation Army. And the Symbionese Liberation Army, the first thing that they did, they were a left adventurist group. And they did specifically what Vladimir Lenin and all the great Marxists have said not to do, right? Not to do. They had this idea that they were going to commit an act of violence or terrorism, and that through doing that, they were going to then inspire a mass uprising. That never happens. It actually has the opposite effect. Generally, when leftists go around committing acts of violence and terrorism, what happens is the government uses that to crack down on leftists, number one. Number two, average people get scared of communists and leftists because they don't want to get killed or blown up or don't want to have the government arrest them, and it tends to isolate revolutionaries from the masses. It's a bad thing for leftists to do. Lenin addresses this in his book, What Is to Be Done. Many other places, it's addressed it. Left adventurism, terrorism is not a good thing, but it has this romantic appeal, right? People think they're movie stars, they think they're Bonnie and Clyde or Chuck Norris or something like that. So it's sexy, right? It's it's exciting, right? It's badass, but it's stupid, and it really harms the revolutionary movement, and it's a bad thing to do. But regardless, this group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, they were thinking about how they could spark a revolution by acts of violence. The first thing that they did is they killed Marcus Foster. Marcus Foster was the first African-American superintendent of schools in Oakland, California, if I'm not mistaken. And he made a policy. He was the first African-American to actually, take up, I think he was the superintendent. And it was a big deal, and he was widely loved in the black community. It was seen as a huge breakthrough that this African-American man became the school superintendent. And they shot him because of the fact that he had implemented a policy where all students had to carry ID with them, student ID. Right? I guess the Symbionese Liberation Army thought that was a fascist policy. So they killed Marcus Foster. And they didn't just, kind of kill him. They shot him with bullets that they hollowed out and put cyanide into. Okay? I mean, there was no way, this guy had no chance of surviving, right? It's one thing, you shoot somebody, they might die, they'll probably die. No, they killed him. I mean, they killed him dead, as they say. So they killed him. And when this happened, many people assumed it was a right-wing group, a group of racists. They thought it was the Klan or the Nazis or something. They thought they were the ones that killed him. Turns out it was actually the Symbionese Liberation Army. And it was a pretty dumb thing to do. And they eventually ended up arresting, I think, the people who did it, and they ended up going to prison. So the next move from the Symbionese Liberation Army was that they discovered that, I guess, the Patty Hearst, who was the heiress, she was like the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, right? William Randolph Hearst was this really, really right-wing, pro-fascist, anti-communist media. The movie Citizen Kane is based on him. So William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter, I think, daughter or granddaughter, Patty Hearst, was going to college in the Bay Area. They figured out where she was in college, and they kidnapped her. And they abducted her. They kidnapped her, and they kidnapped her. They kidnapped Patty Hearst, and then they abducted her, and they took her hostage. And of course, she was beautiful and she was famous, and so this was all over the media because she was like a movie star, right? She was like a movie star. She was, beautiful. And so this was all over the media that Patty Hearst had been kidnapped. They kidnapped her, and they demanded that the Hearst family pay $2 million to low-income people. They give $2 million of free food away to low-income people in the African-American community in Oakland. So they did, and they actually, the Symbionese Liberation Army demanded that every item of food that they give away have their manifesto on it. So, they spent $2 million to try and get their daughter back, and all these people in the low-income areas got free food with the Symbionese Liberation Army's manifesto stapled to it. I mean, it's like nuts. So, and of course, the police, were resentful about all these low-income black people getting free food. And so, the police, they took turkeys and threw them at people's heads, and there were riots that then broke out. It was a pretty awful situation. But many people pointed out, though, that, the USA had a booming economy at this point. This was before the big economic downturn. But even then, the media really played up this idea that you were a bad person if you went and got any of that food from the Symbionese Liberation Army. They are kidnappers and all that. But still, thousands of people lined up to get food from the Symbionese Liberation Army. So that showed that even at a time when capitalism was in its boom, when, before the post-World War II economic downturn came to an end, even then, there was massive hunger. throughout the United States. And that revealed that there were many, many people in the United States who, even despite being told by the media they were bad and all that, the fact that thousands of people lined up to get free food from this group of communists, communist terrorists that had forced it as ransom, that showed that that there is, even at the time that it was supposedly a good economy here in the USA, thousands of people lined up to get free food. So that showed something. What's interesting is eventually Patty Hearst converted to being part of the Symbionese Liberation Army and refused to go back to, they were going to let her go, and she said, no, I'll stay. And, she took on the name Tanya. She changed her name to Tanya, and she started doing bank robberies with them. She was converted in the Symbionese Liberation Army. Eventually, she got caught, and she went to prison. Another wild story is that Sarah Jane Moore, and this is really wild. So the FBI and U.S. intelligence is obviously concerned about this violent terrorist group that is, kidnapping Patty Hearst and shooting school principals and such. And when the food was being given away, it occurred to them that some of the people who might volunteer with the food being given away might be sympathizers with the Symbionese Liberation Army. So this woman named Sarah Jane Moore, and I believe that Sarah Jane Moore, I think was she an Air Force intelligence officer or FBI or something like that? She was sent by the government to help give away the free food and spy on people while they were doing it. She was an informer. And while she was giving away free food in African-American communities and trying to spy on people to see if they could figure out if any of the people that were helping out were actually involved with the terrorist group, she became impressed with the Symbionese Liberation Army. Can't make this up. This is like so nuts. She became impressed with the Symbionese Liberation Army. The more she read about them, she read their manifestos and all of this, she thought they were pretty cool. So then she went and tried to assassinate U.S. President Gerald Ford and went to prison for the rest of her life. I think she finally got out during the Obama years. But so then this FBI informer went and got converted while they were giving free food away and then went and tried to kill the president. So, you want to talk about insanity. This is the insanity of left adventurism, right? The future of socialism is with the broad masses of people. Ultra-left adventurism, terrorism, these kind of acts are detrimental to a revolutionary movement. They are the exact opposite of what revolutionaries should be doing. It's the last thing people should be doing. Ultra-leftism, terrorism, it's not a good thing at all. And but that's the Symbionese Liberation Army. I don't know as much about the Red Army faction. They used to call them the Baader-Meinhof gang. That was in Germany, and it was a similar group. They conducted bombings and assassinations. They called themselves Maoist communists or something like that. And it was a similar organization that existed in the early 70s. Now, I believe the direct question that I got was, what did major socialist states, how did they react to the SLA and the RAF? I don't know of any connection between a major socialist state and the Symbionese Liberation Army at all. I don't know of any connection. What I do know about is the Red Army faction, which was this terrorist ultra-leftist group in Germany, that they went to Palestine to try and get training from the PLO, from the Palestine Liberation Organization, and from Yasser Arafat. That they were Germans, but they went to Lebanon or Jordan. They went to some place that the PLO, that Yasser Arafat and the PLO was, to try and get training. And hilariously, the PLO was secular at that point, but it was a Muslim country. And so they got there, and they had a rule. They were very clear that men in this tent, women in this tent. Pretty clear. It's, generally when there's people living together, big groups of people, men in this tent, women in this, pretty clear, right? You don't have to be a Muslim to understand that. It's pretty, that's generally how people do things. Men in this tent, women in this tent. But the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang, one of the perks of being the leader of an ultra-left adventurous terrorist group that is culty and all of that, one of the perks of it is all the women have to have sex with you. You can't make this, it's so disgusting. But, so I guess the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang was quite angry that the PLO had this rule that he couldn't have all the women in his tent having sex with him. He was quite upset about this. So apparently they left. They stopped working with the PLO because the leader of the Binder-Meinhof gang was frustrated that they had a rule that he couldn't have all the women come in his tent all the time. The other thing about the Baader-Meinhof gang that I heard is that after they were arrested, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who was like kind of an existentialist but had Marxist roots and all of this, decided he was going to go interview the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang. And he was like, I am going to interview this guy, and I am going to get a cutting-edge interview, and it's going to be amazing, and I'm going to argue with him about left adventurism, and it's going to be this dynamic interview. And so, Jean-Paul Sartre, this amazing French intellectual, he's going to go interview this left adventurist terrorist, and they're going to have an intense discussion about what motivated him to take these acts. Jean-Paul Sartre went and interviewed the guy, and he found out the guy was a complete idiot. The guy, the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang was a blathering idiot. He was like a drugged out lunatic. He would take LSD. He would take like 3 hits of LSD at a time, and the guy was a drugged out lunatic who was leading the Baader-Meinhof gang. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't a serious Marxist who had adopted left adventurist ideologies. The guy was a blathering lunatic. And Jean-Paul Sartre was deeply disappointed by interviewing the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang and finding out that he was a blathering idiot. And I must say that, the same can be said for Charles Manson, right? I cannot finish a Charles Manson interview. The guy is a blathering idiot, okay? And it is beyond me. U.S. media spent hours and hours and hours. They will point cameras at Charles Manson. And, he's a blathering idiot. He's a blathering idiot. Charles Manson is a blathering idiot, okay? He's a blathering idiot. It's like he's incoherent. He doesn't make any sense. He doesn't have anything profound to say. But there are many TV interviews where they'll sit there and Charles Manson will just talk and he doesn't say anything. He's a lunatic. That's a lot of these ultra-left adventurist kind of people are blathering idiots, right? Again, they become ultra-left adventurists. I'll just say this. They become ultra-left adventurists because they're not very smart, right? They can't write a good book. They can't persuade people with logical arguments to be socialists, but they want to be popular and they want to be well-known. They want to be badass. So they say, well, I can't actually organize anything and I can't actually get anything done, but if I go blow something up or shoot somebody, then everyone will know who I am. I'll be a big shot, That's basically what it is. A lot of the weather underground people are blathering idiots. You listen to some of the interviews. Some of them are not, right? But some of them are, okay? Charles Manson, blathering idiot. The Symbionese Liberation Army, killing Marcus, blathering idiots. The Red Army faction guy, blathering idiots. A lot of the people that engage in ultra-left adventurism are not all there. It's not very well thought out. I'm sorry, but it's like you want to overturn capitalism, so you're going to go out and commit some act of violent terrorism, and then everyone's going to go, oh, by golly, somebody just committed an act of violent terrorism. By golly, that means we ought to get rid of capitalism. By golly, why, thank goodness you did that. Thank goodness you did that. I would never have thought of overthrowing capitalism before, but you committed this bombing or this explosion, and that persuaded me. It was propaganda of the deed, by golly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank goodness you didn't make any logical arguments or try to convince me or challenge some of the propaganda I've heard. Thank goodness you didn't build an organization in my community that would actually convince me of these things. Thank goodness you went out and did something violent and illegal. That persuaded me. It's propaganda of the deed. Thank goodness. Oh boy, I wish. It's like, give me a break. Give me a break. I'm sorry, but it's like, I've probably said too much. I've probably given way too long of an answer to this question, but it's worth asking. Somebody asked me, how did major socialist states react to the SLA and the RAF? And I don't know of any socialist state that had any relationship with the SLA. As far as the RAF, the only people that I haven't studied their history intensely, so I really don't know. But my understanding is that they did briefly have a relationship with the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and that went south. And also that various people were very disappointed. And that's one of the things that happens, like when stuff like that, when stuff like this happens, right? Is that a lot of people, they will project their own ideas on them, right? At the time that the Weather Underground were doing their bombings, at the time that the SLA kidnapped Patty Hearst, the time that the Red Army faction, that they did their terrorism or whatever, a lot of people want there to be good guys, which is fine. I mean, it's fine to want there to be good guys. And so they will try to make these people into romantic heroes and stuff. They'll really try. They want there to be good guys. Right? And I will tell you, I mean, at the time Patty Hearst was kidnapped, there were a lot of young leftists who really, had some kind of like admiration for them. Most average Americans did not. But among young kind of hippie counterculture people, there were a lot of them who went, whoa, that's so cool. There were a lot of them that kind of had a great admiration for them, at the time that they did that, right? And that people want there to be good guys. People want there to be good guys, and they tend to get a lot of publicity. And, there's a lot of people that want to be able to cheer for somebody, I mean, nowadays with the internet, things are a little bit different, but it used to be, there were only 5 TV stations, and there's only so much out there. And, if you realize that the people running the country are the bad guys, you really want there to be good guys out there. You really want there to be good guys out there. So, some crazy ultra-left adventurist group comes along and does something. There's somebody you can cheer for, right? There's somebody you can applaud for on the news. That's how they feel. And it's unfortunate. It's really, really unfortunate. And at the end of the day, right, we know that this kind of thing, eventually these people get caught and eventually they go to prison. We've all seen, how many movies have we seen? Where it's like, the hero eventually, gets caught, the hero becomes a criminal and eventually gets caught or something like that. And that's going to happen. These people are basically committing suicide, right? There's a whole book, Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton, and I admire Huey Newton a lot, but a lot of the themes in that book I don't particularly like. That's not my favorite work of his. And that, there's this assumption, I think, on the part of a lot of the people who engage in that kind of activity. It's like they assume that they're going to be caught, they're going to be killed, and they're just like, it's almost like they're committing suicide by system, right? They're committing suicide by cop. They don't really believe that you could actually have a movement that could actually organize people and could actually change society. They don't believe that. And part of them doesn't believe it. And they just kind of get into this mindset where they're like, well, I want to go down in a blaze of glory. I want to go down in a blaze of glory. I want to be remembered as somebody who fought against these MFers. And, that's a lot of that pessimistic synthetic leftism. Left adventurism is a deviation. Propaganda of the deed, George Sorel and Sorelianism and the romanticization of violence. All of this is a deviation from the optimism of Marxism. Marxism is a fundamentally optimistic ideology. It's that whole opening I just gave in there is about how much joy it gives people to be part of a revolutionary movement, and to be organizing, and to be building socialist communities that are actually getting things done, right? Socialism is a fundamentally optimistic movement. But left adventurism, left adventurous terrorism, the romanticization of it, all of this is really an internalization of pessimism, right? These people, it's like, they might as well go be school shooters. They might as well become an incel shooter. Or, it's the same kind of mindset. They're like, fuck my life. I'm so miserable. I hate my life. They're at the point where they almost want to commit suicide. They think, oh, I don't want to just commit suicide. I'm going to go down in a blaze of glory. I'm going to take a bunch of people down with me. I'm going to be remembered. And it's awful. We can do better than that. We can do so much better than that. I tell people I'm a socialist, not because I want to destroy America, because I want to save America. Well, I'm a socialist because I want to live, not because I want to die, right? I'm a socialist because I want to live for a higher purpose and live for saving this country, not because I want to die in a blaze of glory, right? And that is, I mean, there are people who make great sacrifices, and I admire people who will make great sacrifices, get arrested for the labor movement. Gus Hall went to prison for how many years, and William Z. Foster was imprisoned at one point, and, people make great sacrifices, and that's admirable. But when people get into this mindset that we can't actually win, so I'm just going to go down in a blaze of glory, that's toxic. That's toxic. I'm a socialist because I want to live, not because I want to die. I'm a socialist because I want to save America, not because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want stability and a society where people don't have to worry about being unemployed and don't have to be hungry, where human wealth is expanding, not because I want a blaze of glory and destruction. And look, folks, this is a little bit of a weird thing to say, okay? A lot of left adventurism and a lot of left pessimism, I would argue, is sexual. It's sexual. And that sounds really weird, like you're saying this, Caleb. How can it be sexual? That doesn't make any sense. Well, look. Have you ever watched the Wagner opera, right? The Ring Cycle, the Wagner Ring Cycle by Wagner. The last opera is called Götterdämmerung. And at the end of the opera, right, Siegfried, the hero, is killed, he's stabbed in the back, he's betrayed by a friend. So Brunhild, the hero, she lights his funeral pyre, and she gets on her horse, and she rides her horse into the funeral pyre, right? It's called the Brunhild immolation scene. And then the flames from the funeral pyre spread over the whole world, and the whole world bursts into flames. It's like the Armageddon. It's the Armageddon, the Götterdämmerung, the Ragnarok of Norse mythology. And the whole world bursts into flames, and then at the end, everything's at peace, and you hear the music of the Rhine River. I mean, why is that desirable? It's beautiful if you watch it. You're just on the edge of your seat. It's very exciting. Why is that? Well, because everybody knows, and everybody knows this, right? And this is one of the things people have written about Wagner, is that Wagner's music imitates sex. All right? It imitates the sexual act. It imitates the orgasm, right? And that scene where, Brunhild is riding her horse, into the flames, and the flames explode. That's imitating the sex. That's imitating the orgasm, right? It's the musical orgasm, basically, right? And, a lot of good art does that. It's libidinal, as Hypatia Muse is putting it, right? A lot of good art does that, right? That, think about your favorite song or whatever. It tends to reach a climax and then calm down afterwards. That's art, okay? Real life is not like the sex act. It's not, okay? I mean, I'm just telling you, right? Like, anyone who's ever been in a war will tell you war is not an orgasm. Right? I mean, it's like, war is not like you build up to this glorious climax and then everything's okay. No. Anyone who's ever been in a war will tell you that is not what happens, right? Do you think the people in Gaza right now are like having some orgasm? No, they're dying, okay? That life is not porn. Porn is not life, and life is not porn, okay? That's just a fact. But a lot of these people that are left adventurers, they have this, this image in their head that the revolution, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be so bad. People just won't be able to take it anymore. And then it'll explode and we'll rise up and it'll be glorious and everything will fall down and then everything will be peaceful. And that's the end. And I'm just telling you, that's not how it is. That is, you have a sexual narrative in your head. You have a pornographic narrative in your head, and you're projecting a sexual narrative onto your politics, right? That's what you're doing. And because pornography is everywhere in our society right now, right? I think that it's very hard to not think of real life in those terms, because porn is everywhere in our society, everywhere. And so people think that revolutionary violence and all of that is going to somehow line up with a pornographic narrative. It's not, okay? It's not, right? The way revolutions happen is not like Gotterdammerung, right? It's just not like that. The world doesn't just burst into flames and then everything's better afterwards. And that's not how things work, okay? It might make a fun rock concert to go to, might make a fun Wagner opera, might make a great action movie, but life is not porn, okay? And that ultra-left adventurism is, in a lot of ways, it's projecting pornography onto Marxism. Marxism is scientific, it's economic, it's meticulous, it's about data, and it is a projection of pornography onto politics. Look, and Lenin himself, right? One of my favorite quotes from Lenin, he talks about how during a period of demoralization, right, he talks about how after the 1905 revolution in Russia, when it didn't succeed, there was demoralization in the revolutionary movement in Russia. And he said very famously, this is in Left-Wing Communism, the book by Lenin, he says, pornography took the place of politics. And you can argue that a lot of synthetic leftism, a lot of left adventurism, is pornography taking the place of politics. These people have a pornographic narrative in their head. And there you go. And, we need to get over that. We need to get over that. So there you go. Someone said in the chat, you never know what you're going to get when you come on a Caleb Maupin stream. That is correct. That is correct. You never know what you're going to get when you get on one of my streams.